Howdy, Kate. How are you today?
I'm great, Donna. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for joining me today in another episode of our relationship to things in the new paradigm and in 2022. And today we're going to talk about our relationship to the word fear. I like to say it's just a word because anything that's not love is just not love. It's either love or not love. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But first, I'm going to take an opportunity to promote my latest adventure. Will you allow me to do that, Kate?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. So it is official. I have just launched today a new podcast, and it is called Linking to the Afterlife. And you can find it on, I'm sure, 90% of what you people watch and listen to your podcast on these days. I know it's on Apple, it is on Spotify, it is on iHeartRadio, and a bunch of other ones. But if you have any trouble finding it, I'm going to be posting it on social media very shortly. So if you're watching this on my social media, be sure to be on the lookout for that. It is just me giving readings to clients and connecting them with their loved ones. Lots of fun has been had already, and I look forward to more. And there are ways that you guys can get involved and get a reading with me. And that'll be somewhere in the show notes, the email. I'm not going to give it out right now, but it's somewhere in the show notes. Just give us time to get back to you because I got a feeling it's going to be a lot of people asking.
Well, congratulations. That's absolutely wonderful. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I figured might as well jump on the bandwagon, right?
Right. Join them all.
Yeah, everybody's doing it. You'll find me.
Yeah.
If you need it, you'll find me.
Exactly.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about fear, our relationship to fear. I don't know. For me, I don't know if I've ever said I'm afraid of that. I don't think I've ever used that term. I might have felt it, but I don't think I've ever said, ooh, I might have said that scares me or that makes me a little anxious. But I think I've always had this aversion to that word fear. I felt it was so, for the longest time, I said there was either love or fear. But now I say that's not true anymore. We've evolved into it's either love or not love. So that word doesn't exist. However, it doesn't mean we don't feel afraid, that our body is not responding to some sort of hyper alert status, right? The nervous system. I think the first time I recognized that I thought I was afraid of one thing, but then I realized I wasn't afraid of that. I was afraid of something else. I'm going to tell a quick story about that. When I was living in Vermont, I was seeing a gentleman that wasn't good for me. I couldn't get out of the relationship. And although at one point I hadn't seen him for probably 3 years, it was still a small town and you drove by each other every once in a while. But even though we haven't spoken, I realized it was time for me to leave. But I was so afraid to leave the state. I did it, but I felt like there was something underlying. As soon as I left the state, and he did not contact me, he knew I left the state. In fact, he drove by my house just because I lived on a main road the day I was packing up my U-Haul.
Wow.
And I hadn't spoken to him in years. We hadn't spoken in years. And he still never contacted me, knowing I was leaving. So my fear was not leaving him or leaving the state. My fear was he didn't want me. Even when I left the state, he still didn't reach out to me and say, oh, don't go. Is it really over? If you're leaving the state, it must be really over. None of that happened. And I recognized that that was my fear, not doing it, but what was going to happen after.
Wow. That's heavy. That's significant.
I can once that happened, that was over 10 years ago. Once that happened, I now recognize that more with doing this podcast. There was a lot of anxiety. My sister is my producer, and she just called me one day and said, let's do a podcast. And I went, I'm not saying no to that, but I felt anxiety come up, but I knew it wasn't. I knew Spirit would just lead me in it at this point, right? Spirit would just lead me.
Right.
And then I just recognized I really wasn't afraid of doing the podcast. I was afraid of what people would say afterwards, like how they would, the skeptics.
Yeah.
And I've had small bits of skepticism and trolls that come onto my social media, but nothing big. But
Right.
now putting myself out this way, I open myself up to even more of that type of thing. And that was what I was afraid of, not doing the podcast, because I'm like, I know I can do this. I know I'm good at reading people, but I was afraid of what would happen after. And I had to really feel it and call it up and recognize it and say, I think I'm afraid. I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about that. That's not love. And instead of that voice saying, you can't do that, Donna, you can't do that podcast, you're not good enough, the voice changed to, hell, you're good at that, Donna. You're really good at this. So I noticed love just encompassed that fear and helped it just disintegrate. So I didn't push away the fear. I didn't have to analyze it over and over again. I just said, I love it. It came up. I'm looking at it. And then all of a sudden it just said, Donna, you're really good at this. And I'm like, was that the same voice that said, you suck, Donna? You can't do this. You should be afraid.
One voice sounds like you, one voice sounds like Tom Waits, and that's the one that usually is the negative one. Like a little distinction.
I didn't understand any of it. I just went, who just said that?
Yeah.
And then it just got bigger and bigger. That voice of, yes, you can do this, just got bigger and bigger. And I got so much feedback from Spirit. Like the logo came to me one night when I closed my eyes, and then this came to me, and then this came to me. And I'm like, all right, I'm doing this. How does that like relate to some of your fear experiences?
Oh, well, I mean, honestly, it really resonates. And I think what you said at the beginning about maybe not saying, oh, I'm afraid of that, but feeling it in your body. I think that's what I've always been. I've always been very stubborn, and I've gotten better at it over the years about showing my emotions, because when I was younger, and I remember more so in elementary school, if you had sort of a emotional reaction to something, more so on the negative side, if you will, to label it for this purpose, I would always get branded very sensitive or too sensitive, or you're too emotional and need to be tougher. And so I, not even actively thinking about it, would internalize these feelings. And then even if something came up that I would be afraid of, or, fearful of doing, I guess, I would kind of just, oh, I'm fine, I got this. But inside I would be a ball of something, right? And so it was kind of having to work through that and that feeling. But I've generally always been the kind of person who likes to push myself to do the things that I'm uncomfortable with. I think of it more as a discomfort versus a fear, because it's just new, right? And I think that's how I've sort of looked at it. But I think I've gotten better at being a little bit more vocal about my feelings. And I've definitely had a lot of, I think, fear and anxiety around people leaving me. And what you said about that, even though the relationship was over and you really didn't even want to be in that relationship, it is really hard as human beings to deal with that, essentially a form of rejection, right? And I've had this with friends who essentially ghosted out of my life, to use a term, in this space. And it's not that anything bad really happened necessarily. It's just that it just kind of disintegrated in front of my eyes, and you're kind of left wondering. And it's hard not to think, did I do something, or what happened? But again, it's all for our highest good, I believe. And I know the universe supports me, and I know that I have so much love around me. So I kind of just, sort of walk towards those moments of discomfort now and realize that that's sort of the path that I've chosen anyways. And it's sort of unlocking new doors as these things happen, and which is great. So I almost kind of welcome it in a weird way. It's kind of like being an adrenaline junkie and just, what do you have for me now? Right? What can I get my hands into now that's going to make me a little bit uncomfortable? And so, I think that's, as human beings, how we grow as well. If we're never sort of challenged in that way, how will we, get to that next level? And similar to you, I was invited into a podcast scenario, never thought I could do that, thought the sound of my voice would deter people. And then I got such amazing feedback and I really enjoyed doing it. And so it's like, maybe there's something to this, right? So I totally resonate with everything you're saying, truthfully.
So do you think, like for me, it was past fears
Right.
that showed up again here? Because clearly we both walked through so many things that we weren't unloving. We felt like we were loving them. But that word, that was deeper for me. That fear of, like you said, being abandoned, that's deep for me. That's childhood. That's past lifetimes. This guy was in so many of my past lifetimes. I saw so many of them.
Right.
And each time I left him in those past lives, I died.
Right.
Every single time I died. He never did. I did. But then
Right.
again, I don't know what happened to him after I died. So I was constantly afraid of that. Number one, I was afraid of leaving him,
Mhm.
that I would die, but that was an unconscious fear until I started seeing those past lives. And then I started to say, oh, Donna, you, you're not going to die. Those were those past lives that you died, not this one. You're not going to die. You have friends now, you have a therapist, you have things that you can do. So you see how the evolution of time, whether it's this life or last lifetime, it also evolves. Our fear also evolves.
Yeah. It's true. And I think what you're saying is very, very accurate. Past life, for sure. Even though I don't really have any awareness as to what my past lives were necessarily, I have sort of hints now and again, but not full pictures. But I also do think a lot of it is childhood based and unconscious. And that's how, as things start to come up, why it's, a really great opportunity to look at it in the present moment. Because when you do that, that's when you sort of um, push through those triggers and those traumas and work through them actually, right? And
Yeah.
things that you might not even know have existed. And I think for me, I don't know why. I mean, I have loving parents and family, but there's a portion of in relationships, in friendships, in even workplace settings where I feel like my love or my service is conditional. And that is something that came to light very recently. And, I've always been a very giving, generous person, whether it be my time, my service, anything. And I've always felt like that's been, something that I've almost had to do in order to keep people around in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's, you know, I look back at my childhood and I'm starting to wonder if maybe there's aspects of that there, but maybe it is something also in the past life. And that was something really eye-opening to reflect on. But I do think, to your point that, a lot happens in our childhood that maybe, we're not aware of, we can't process because we haven't had that much experience in this lifetime yet to really get to the heart of why it's happening or what's going on truly, right? So then we compartmentalize, we shove it away, and then it shows up later on in all these different interactions and situations, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an evolution, just like
Yeah.
that's what we come in here for. We can't all figure it out at once. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you are, and I feel I've been doing this work forever. But then again, like something pops up and you're more aware of the feelings now. That's what relationship to all these emotions are in the new paradigm. It's not an attachment to the emotions. It's a relationship. Let's have a relationship with the emotion. And then what do you do with yourself? What do you do with that emotion? And what are you going to do with you? Because now you've called it in, you've accepted it, but you're not attaching to it. So you
Right.
can still be afraid of doing something. You're just not attached to the fear of it anymore. You just go. But I don't want you to get rid of all those other emotions. They still exist.
Right.
You go along with an emotionless emotion.
Right.
Have
And
the
the other thing,
emotion.
yeah. And the other thing is to, one thing I know that I've done my whole life is sort of shamed myself for having these negative emotions or reactions to things. Whereas now I just sort of, why am I having this? Or asking myself the question, why is it here for me? We talked a bit about this in our last session, right? Why is this happening right now? What is this doing for me in the moment, right? Inviting it in, come on in, let's have a chat. And I think that's been big because I don't know if it's a little bit of a generational thing to, shame yourself or, make yourself feel bad for having, a feeling towards something, regardless of what it is. Right.
Yeah, that
So,
goes back so far,
yeah.
eons, ancestors, um, that because we're judged and we're shamed. So judging says to someone, you did that. Shaming says you did that and now you deserve this.
Yeah.
So we feel like we deserve failure because, oh, I was having a good day. Now something sucky happened. Oh, I must have did something to deserve that. And now I just say, you know what? This is life.
Yeah.
Good shit happens and then not so good shit happens. But if we still look at it with love, like you say, call it in and just talk about it. I had an interesting experience with Abraham Lincoln I'm going to share right now to really close this off. On the anniversary of his passing, I just kind of woke up in the morning and had my eyes closed, and I felt myself in this space of nothingness. It was just dark nothingness. It wasn't scary dark. It was just Donna sitting there in my head of nothingness, different than meditation, different. And Abe said, find yourself there more. And I'm like, where? He said, this space of nothingness. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, and when you do that, let it expand. In that space of nothingness, those people that said something to you yesterday, they don't exist. That thing that you're afraid of, it doesn't exist in that space of nothingness. The only thing that exists in that space is you. So what else could happen in that space? You can't blame yourself
Yeah.
because there's nothing else going on. You're not doing anything. There's no judgment because, again, nobody else is with you, so nobody can judge you. And you really will see it's just about you. It's always about what you need to do for you.
Yeah.
So now when I find my mind going to a place of, oh, what if that happens? What if that happens? I'm like, close my eyes and I just put myself in that big space. And I get a reprieve from that hypersensitive emotion that my body is so used to, my nervous system is so used to. We need to give it a break. So instead of meditation, because meditation, I find people just struggle.
Mhm.
I don't, because I recognize that's what meditation is. Thoughts come in and thoughts go. I have no problem with that. Once in a while, I get a really good one. Fine. That's fine. But this is different. Tell me what you think of that space, of that just a space.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, that would be something I would be more drawn to, because for me meditation is really challenging because I find I'm always overthinking. I'm always, the wheels turning actively all the time to, parts where it's very challenging to sleep sometimes, unless I'm completely drained of my energy
Yeah,
and then I just have no choice. But this thing
exhausted.
is hard to shut off. And I find, active meditation has been really what works for me. Running is the only time that I can, it's like I'm physically exhausting my body that I'm not thinking anymore. And so yesterday I had probably one of the most epic experiences ever while running, because I just did not have a thought in my mind. I could even feel my body in a good way. And I was like floating. I was floating and I was just in this zone. And it kind of felt like going into that dark nothingness space. And then I was at the end of it. I was like, wait, I'm already done? You know?
Yeah.
So I definitely love that idea for sure.
And now you can practice because you've already had the feeling. So now you
Yeah.
memorize that feeling, bring it back. I think I equate it to one time last year I was helping my brother and I fainted. And it was the first time I've ever in my life fainted. And when I came to, there was nothing in my head. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know why I was on the floor. And my brother's just hanging over me. I'm not pretty sure. I didn't even know who he was. And then eventually it came back. But there was a moment where there was nothing in my head. Usually spirit will talk. If there's nothing in my head, give spirit a chance. There was nothing in my head. There was nothing in my head. Nothing. I couldn't think. I'm like, this is a great place to be, because I couldn't remember what happened yesterday. I couldn't, and eventually it all came back and it's perfectly normal.
Yeah.
But I equate it to that space, that nothingness space where there's nothing in there but me sitting there. Nobody's judging me. I'm not judging myself either. But if I was, I would hear it there
Yes.
because there's nobody else but me.
Yeah.
We're going to end there and say to everyone, good luck with your awareness of fear in the new paradigm, your relationship to fear. And we know that this is going to help, but let us know in the comments, and let us also know when you listen to the podcast. I hope to hear your reviews and see your ratings on whatever app you choose to listen. Let me know. Let me know if you found it, because still I'm like, how many places got it? I've just kept clicking buttons. Send it there. Okay, send it there. Send it there. Never heard of that place, but okay, send it there. So let me know where you saw me on my podcast. Kate, again, I can't thank you enough for showing up for me today and joining me in this little chat.
I love it. And I'll be here anytime.
Great. There's a lot more emotions and stuff we need to have relationships with. All right, honey, take care of yourself.
Thank you, you too.
Bye, everybody.